So, when Japanese forces show up on Earth, a bunch of students are going to have to tackle some wild challenges to make it through. Today, let's go over the story of the movie As the Gods Will from 2014. In Tokyo, there was this guy named Shun Takahata who was super smart and always stood out among his classmates. But since he was way ahead of everyone else, he started feeling bored and decided to ask the gods for a challenge. At his request and the requests of some other talented kids, the Daruma entity crashes into Shun's room, but he's so zoned out that he doesn't even see the spirit right there in front of him. So, he almost gets hit and just barely dodges a brutal fatality, escaping getting his brains blown out at the last second. Seeing that they can't move with the puppet watching, the other students just freeze and hang tight until he turns away. Then they seize the chance to dash for the door. They found out they're stuck in the room until the game's done. As they're about to head out, Daruma spins around and takes out two participants in the doorway, then just turns back around. The students start to freak out, but young Satake steps in and calms everyone down, letting them know they're stuck inside the Daruma Sanga Karanda, a game where someone turns their back and starts saying the name of the challenge, spinning around when they finish the sentence. As soon as Daruma looks at the students, anyone who moves will end up with their brains transformed into a bunch of tiny red balls. So, when everyone's feeling down again, Satake steps in and says he's got a plan to wrap things up. He gives them a heads up about the button on the doll's back, saying all they need to do is press it to call it quits on the game. Trying to escape the nightmare, another student sees that Daruma is talking slowly and decides to make a run for it. But just as he starts moving, Daruma speeds up his speech and turns around, catching the student off guard and making his head pop like popcorn. The students totally freak out instead of keeping their cool and figuring out how to take down the entity. When they spot the counter on Daruma's back and see there's less than a minute left in the challenge, panic sets in, and most of them rush toward the doll, getting themselves eliminated. With a little over 10 seconds to go, it's just Shun and Satake left, and they team up to take on the challenge together. The guy with glasses bends down to give Takahata a boost, hitting the button on the doll's back just in time with 1 second to spare on the clock. So, after getting beat, Daruma calls it quits and both Shun and Satake are all hyped up celebrating, but just as they're high-fiving, the other guy's head goes boom! Then that wild doll chimes in, saying only Takahata hit the button, so he's the only one who actually won the challenge. Shun can't believe what's just gone down and starts to call for help, but Daruma jumps in, breaking the quiet to say he's a mouse and that the cat is on its way. Here's the hint for the next challenge. Out of nowhere, the living room door swings open, and her childhood buddy, Ichika Akamoto, walks in, looking totally stunned. Takahata sees her and decides to step in, asking what's up. He finds out she went through the Daruma Sanga Karanda too, but when she hit the button, it wiped out all her classmates. So Shun hears the story and says it happened to him too. He suggests calling the police, but when he grabs his phone, he finds out there's no signal at all. Takahata still thinks they should call the cops and suggests bouncing from the school, but they find all the doors locked except for the gym entrance. Once they step into the court, the door shuts behind them, and they're stuck again, but hey, at least they've got company. In the middle of the court, a bunch of other students are hanging out, and a few of them are dressed up like rats, playing the part that Daruma mentioned. As Shun gets closer, he spots some kanji on the ground, and figures out that they're the instructions for the next challenge, which say they need to give the bell to the cat to win. As the game is about to kick off, one of the students in costume suggests that everyone should throw on a rat costume, joking that they have no idea what might happen if they don't. But just as they're about to get dressed, the ground suddenly cracks open, and a massive maneki neko pops up right in the middle of the court. Out of nowhere, music kicks in, and the giant cat statue comes to life, gobbling up one of the students in costume. The students are in a panic, running around as the kitty moves closer to Ichika, but instead of going after her, it just spins around and stretches its springy neck to gobble up other students in their costumes. As Ichika runs around, she spots a bell rolling on the ground, and Takahata quickly catches sight of the basketball hoop dangling from the cat's collar, finally getting what the message on the ground is all about. So, after Shun spills the beans about the bell, one of the basketball players asks Ichika to toss it over. He goes for the basket, but even with his killer aim, the porcelain cat totally intercepts it and sends the ball flying back, slamming the poor dude into the wall. After taking out another student, the cat locks eyes with Shun, but instead of going after him, it just shifts its focus to someone else in a costume. Takahata finally figures out that the cat is after the mice and tells everyone to ditch their costumes. But just when they think they're in the clear, the maneki nako starts moving again and is now gobbling everyone up. The students are in a rush, sprinting across the court, and Ichika takes a tumble right next to the bell, suddenly realizing they've only got 3 minutes to go. Just then, the cat strolls over to the girl and opens its huge mouth like it's ready to gobble her up. But right when it's about to take a bite, Shun shows up dressed as a mouse and pulls off a distraction to save the day. While dodging the creature and running around, Takahata calls out for someone to toss the bell, but everyone is too scared to end up like the player and just says no. At that moment, Shun starts to hear this weird voice and figures out that, since he's got the costume on, he can actually understand what the cat is saying. The young guy tunes into the voice and figures out that the creature has an itchy back and is looking for someone to give it a massage so it can catch some Z's. Now that he gets what it wants, Shun dashes to the back of the cat and leaps onto its back, gripping the ropes so he can give the creature a good scratch. Once he starts doing this, the kitten totally digs it and stops trying to pounce on him, just begging for more and more. Realizing he needs a little extra support, Shun reaches out to his classmates, and Ichika steps up to join him. Right after her, the other students hop on the cat's back too, and they all team up until they finally get him to snooze. Now that it's out, Takahata grabs the bell and gets ready to toss it as the other students come over. Worried that only the person who tosses it will make it out alive, they begin bickering over who should throw the bell, and in the chaos, the cat wakes up and takes out two students at once. Shun quickly comes up with a plan since there's no time to get him back to sleep. He grabs a torn basketball and asks Ichika to join him in heading to the locker room with the bell. Before too long, they come back with the ball and the bell all wrapped up in the mouse costume, each heading in from opposite sides, leaving the cat totally confused about which throw to block. As Shun dashed towards the kitten, he totally showed everyone that he had the ball, and the entity got ready to block Ichika's throw, but it was all part of the game plan. So, while his buddy's distracted, Takahata decides to show off a bit. He pulls out the bell from under the ripped ball and tosses it at the creature, but oops, he totally misses and it just lands in the basket instead. Right when everyone thinks they've blown it, a determined student named Amaya swoops in over the cat and slams the ball into the basket, clinching the win at the last moment. Out of nowhere, the huge Maneki Nako powers down for a moment, then comes back to life to announce that Amaya, Shun, and Ichika are the winners. Takahata starts to get curious about where all the other students are, and then he spots Amaya taking them out one by one with an iron bar. Totally wild, this young guy strolls up to the two and tells Shun that they've been picked by God, so they're the only ones meant to make it out alive. After hearing this crazy talk, Ichika tells him he's totally out of his mind and that he shouldn't even think about comparing himself to Takahata. But Amaya isn't having any of it and steps up to the girl, making Shun jump in to hold him back. Right then, the cat lets out a big puff of gas, and just like that, all three of them are out cold in no time. People around the world are starting to catch wind of the challenges, and broadcasters are beginning to talk about the vanishing young folks, along with these massive floating cubes that just popped up out of nowhere. Shun wakes up in one of these cubes, totally caught off guard to see Takis, an old school buddy who moved away a few years back. Takahata spots two other students in the room, Taira and Tauka, who also made it through the challenges of Daruma-san and Maneki Nako at their schools. After hanging out with his co-workers, Takahata notices that all their last names start with T and figures there must be other rooms around, sorting the survivors by the alphabet. Shun suddenly recalls that Ichika's last name is Akamoto, and he starts to freak out a bit, worried that she's stuck in the same room as Amaya, but with the door locked, he realizes there's not much he can do to help her out. Takahata starts knocking on the door, hoping someone will hear him, but then Taira shows up, acting all high and mighty like the genius he thinks he is. The guy then says that no one's coming to help them and turns on a hologram that shows reports about the cubes all over the world, making it clear they're stuck inside and just have to wait for the next challenge. Out of nowhere, someone starts knocking on the door, and it just unlocks, letting 4 Kokeshis stroll right in. As soon as he steps into the room, one of the 4 totems calls out to Taira to join in on the fun, and with all his confidence, he jumps right in without hesitating. So they pick the first participant, and the puppets start to fill him in on the challenge. Turns out he's going to play Kagom Kagom, which is this classic game where one person sits blindfolded in the middle of a circle of spirits. Once the person is set up, the entities start to stroll around the chosen one, singing a tune. After they wrap things up, the spirits will give a 10-second countdown, and the participant has to figure out which entity is lurking behind them. If they guess wrong, they're out. Taira thinks this is going to be a piece of cake, so he throws on his blindfold and plops down on the floor, super pumped. But when the Kokeshi stops singing, he starts to feel a bit anxious and ends up messing up. To teach him a lesson, one of the puppets suddenly opens its eyes and zaps him with a beam of light, taking over his body and making him bang his head until it hits the floor hard. So, after taking down the first player, the Kokeshis ask Toka to join in, but she totally passes because she's feeling a bit scared. So, one of the dolls is like, I'm gonna get eliminated anyway, and the girl just goes with it, figuring she might as well have a shot at it. When it's her turn to guess which totem is behind her, Taka gets super nervous about messing it up and ends up taking too long, going over 10 seconds and getting disqualified. Scared, Taka tries to bolt, but quickly finds herself surrounded by the Kokeshis, who shoot that beam right at her forehead. But this time, instead of what happened to Taira, each of the totems yanks the girl's leg to one side, making her body split in half. After taking down another student, the Kokeshi's challenge is on, but looking at how she's doing, Shun realizes his friend can't pull it off and steps up to take her spot. Takahata, now blindfolded, is chilling in the middle of the room, just soaking in the sounds of the Kokeshi's singing. So, when it's time to figure out who's behind him, the young guy takes a bit too long, and one of the totems chimes in that time's up. Right then, Shun yells out which puppet is behind him, and the totems chime in that time's up. The young guy proved he recorded everything, and they wrapped up the challenge with just 6 seconds to spare, so he totally answered in time. The puppets are super curious and ask how he figured it out. Takahashi explains that in the last 2 rounds, they stuck to the same setup, and it was the same Kokeshi who called out when time was up. All he had to do was chill and wait for the puppet to say something to figure out where everyone was at. As he figured out who was behind him in under 10 seconds, the dolls turned to dust and a key popped up from their ashes. Once the coast is clear, Shun and Takes grab the object and head out of the room. But right when they step through the door, they run into a student with a key who's being chased by another Kokeshi. The young guy, feeling a bit frantic, tells them that this totem is after lonely students and suggests they hold hands. Then he jumps in with them. The totem comes over, checks that the trio is actually together, and then heads off to find someone else who's alone, leaving Shun's group with 2 keys. As the trio strolls through the cube's corridors, they suddenly hear a scream and dash towards it, finding Ichika being chased by that clingy doll again. Shun, wanting to help his friend, lets go of the other two's hands and jumps towards Ichika, catching her just in time before the lone totem gets her. In the next hallway, 2 students come across this huge wooden head jammed in the wall, sporting a counter on its forehead and 7 locks for keys. When they hear the noise, Shun's crew rushes over and spots the duo, who also have 2 keys. So, when they count everything, they find out they've got 4 keys, but 3 are still MIA. With just a little over 2 minutes left to track down the rest, they start to feel a bit hopeless. Right then, someone tosses the 3 keys at their feet, and Amaya shows up shortly after, bringing along another student he was using to get around the needy totem. As they're getting ready to move on to the next stage, Amaya casually swats the other student away like a pesky fly and jumps in to join the group. The students, needing the keys to move on to the next challenge, decide to team up with him. They put the 7 items into the wooden head, which opens the way to the next stage. So, the giant head tells them to switch up their outfits and then backs off, creating a tunnel they stroll through until they get to the other side. In the fresh, snowy spot, the crew feels the ground rumbling and quickly figures out it's a huge polar bear showing off some snowboarding moves. Once he wraps up his super rough presentation, the polar bear mentions that he can't stand lies, so his next challenge is to tackle your questions as honestly as he can. The bear then says he'll give them a heads up if anyone's lying, and the group needs to pick who they think the liar is. They'll move on to the next stage as soon as they figure out who the traitor is. After going over all the rules, the bear casually asks what everyone's favorite food is, and everyone lets out a sigh of relief, thinking this one's a piece of cake. Once they replied, the bear-shaped creature started sniffing around and said it caught a whiff of a lie in the air. So, since they've totally messed up the one rule of the game, the polar bear gives them 2 minutes and lets the crew figure out who they think is the liar. After a minute of throwing accusations around, the group mostly ends up pointing at the young guy that Shun and Takas saved, and then the white bear just slams him down, turning him into mush with a quick swipe of its paw. Now that the first suspect is out of the way, the wooden figure moves on to the next question and asks if they like Shun. Ichika and Takas are totally into the young man, so they both confess their feelings for him, and Amaya chimes in that he likes him too. Once everyone chimes in, the spirit drops a bombshell, claiming one of them is lying. Ichika jumps right in and points the finger at Amaya, recalling how he tried to take them out earlier. While the two are going back and forth, Shun can't help but think about why anyone would bother lying, even if they knew it could get them kicked out. The entity just laughs, saying that Shun has finally figured it out. The bear goes on to say that one of his servants is actually in the group, pretending to be human and spreading lies to take them out. After hearing this, the duo from the other school figured that the imposter must be Takasi, since they study together and ignore Ichika and Amaya, who are from the same school. So everyone else knew someone before the challenges and showed up together, except for her. Right when the accusations fly, Ichika and Shun jump in to back up Takase, but the rest just brush them off and go ahead with voting for the girl at the last moment, leading to her being crushed. All that's left is just a heap of blood. Just as the bear is about to ask his next question, Shun jumps in and says he already knows who the traitor is. The entity pauses, intrigued, and is taken aback to find out that Takahata is calling him a liar. The guy then mentions that Takase helped him figure it out and points out that the girl's blood took off the white paint from the creature's fist, showing that the polar bear is really a black bear. Since he was lying Wondering about his color, Shun just figured that everything else was probably a lie too, and that the entity was trying to make them believe there was a traitor among them. All this just to get rid of them. Super mad that someone found out his secret, the demon bear starts going after them, trying to jump on the group to crush them. But he totally misses and ends up stuck in a hot spring that's making him burn from the inside out. So, the entity finally throws in the towel and shares the details for the survivors to find the next challenge spot. When the students arrive at the new spot, they're welcomed by a bunch of dolls that let them know their next and final challenge is going to be a game called Kick the Can. In this game of hide and seek in the underworld, one person gets picked as Akuma, the one who has to find everyone else. Before kicking off the search, this player needs to grab a can that's up high and put it right in the center of a circle on the ground. As Akuma goes for the can, the rest of the crew has to find a spot to hide and chill there until sunset if they want to take the win. So, to win, Akuma just needs to find all the players, call out their names, and then stomp on the can. After that, Akuma grabs the target, and they'll be stuck in a cell until the game wraps up. The dolls then say that, even so, the person who got captured can still be saved if one of the survivors manages to kick the can. This person totally takes down Akuma and sets everyone who's been locked up free. So, the dolls say that the can's got some sort of explosive in it that'll go off the moment it gets kicked. If the participant kicks the object to save the other prisoners, they'll end up losing their own life. Basically, the survivor's goal is to stay under the radar until sunset, while Akuma is trying to catch 3 people and stop the last one from kicking the can. So, after they wrapped up the whole explanation, one of the dolls pulls some sticks out of its mouth and starts drawing lots to pick who gets to be Akuma. And guess what? The unlucky winner is Amaya, the wildest of the bunch. The survivors know what's coming, so they hold their ground and wait for the doll to give the signal. But as soon as the game kicks off, Amaya just goes for it and kicks one of them right over the can, toppling it over before anyone else can even find a spot to hide. Holding the can, he sets it down in the middle of the circle and starts searching for the other players, spotting the 2 students from the other school as soon as they find a spot to hide. The 2 guys, hoping to save themselves, decide to take on Amaya, but the young man is just too strong. Even with both of them together, they end up losing and get captured, heading straight to the cell afterward. Ichika is keeping an eye on Amaya from a distance when she accidentally steps on a can. Oops, now she's been spotted by him, which totally gives away her spot and Takahata's to Akuma. Since Amaya is already on her way, Shun grabs a rope, ties it to something heavy and starts climbing down to grab the can. Amaya rushes over to where she spotted Ichika and starts banging on the door, hoping to get their attention. The girl realizes they can't escape together, so she heads down to find Akuma. But instead of calling out our name and heading to the can, Amaya just knocks her out and keeps going up to look for Shun, only to find the rope he used to get down. Takahata realizes the Akuma is watching the can, so he starts sprinting around, searching for a new spot to hide. Amaya figures Shun might not show up, so she tries to persuade him that he won't catch him. She points out that he's already tagged 3 people, so they could totally be friends and stick together to make it through. Realizing he's not being honest, Shun starts searching for something useful and stumbles upon some plate armor. As the sun starts to set, he steps out from his hiding spot, all geared up in armor to keep himself safe, while he gives the can a good kick. The thing is, the gear is super heavy and makes it tough for him to move around. So, Shun kind of stumbles in front of Amaya and ends up dropping his sword on the ground, looking pretty trapped and totally defenseless near the edge. Since he can only arrest someone after seeing their face, Amaya seizes the moment and yanks off Takahata's helmet while teasing him about his plan. Just about to step on the can to win, Akuma strolls over to it when he suddenly notices there's a chain hooked to his hip. So, it turns out this was Shun's plan from the start. Before he dipped out of the hiding spot, the young guy hooked the chain to his armor and waited for Amaya to take off his helmet. That's when he tied the other end around his waist, making sure he couldn't grab the can. Since Amaya can't win anymore, Takahata just jumps off the edge into the sea, pulling the Akuma along who's really trying not to go with him. Shun's chilling down below, ready to dip his toes in the water. He kicks off his armor and starts climbing back up the wall, making it easy to stroll over to the can while Amaya handles all that heavy lifting from the water. When he gets back up top, Shun is super tired, but he still finds the energy to dash to the can. So, Amaya finally gets the armor back on and makes a break for the can, but despite his hustle, Shun beats him to it and gives the can a kick, saving the day for his friends. Everyone's a bit on edge, bracing for the explosion, but after a few seconds, nothing goes off. Out of nowhere, the sky starts to get all gloomy, and the dolls pop up to call out the champion. Plus, they spill the beans that they totally made up the explosion just to spice things up a bit. Feeling bummed out about losing, Amaya starts complaining that he's going to get kicked out, but the dolls reassure him that it was all just a game, and nobody's actually going to get hurt. To celebrate getting this far, the dolls give each of them a popsicle and say they have to finish it before they can head out. After this adventure, Shun enjoys his popsicle while chatting about future plans with Ichika. So, after chatting for a bit, the guy spots something scribbled on his toothpick and gets all hyped, thinking it's some kind of award. But then he glances over and sees Ichika in tears, realizing her popsicle stick says, "You are eliminated." So, the dolls chime in again and say that each challenge needed a different skill, but really, in the end, all they need is a bit of luck. So, they go on to say that each popsicle has a person's fate on it, and Ichika's is the one that everyone knows about. As Shun stares at his popsicle stick, he feels pretty lucky and knows he's going to make it through, but instead of Ichika, it's going to be Amaya who heads back to school with him. So now that their fates are set, Ichika and the other two students get zapped by one of the dolls that shoots a laser into them, leaving just a hint of their souls behind. After wrapping up the last challenge, Amaya and Takahata get lifted up into one of those cubes cruising over Tokyo. So, with two students still standing, everyone starts to look up to them and calls them the kids of God. So, one of them is going to go down the destruction route to become a Hakaishin, while the other will take the path to become a Shinigami, a god of death.